So my journey to faith has been a little bit bumpy and a little bit spread out. My parents are both atheists, except for my dad, who later turned out to be a secret Christian, which maybe isn't the best kind of Christian. But I got to my teenage years in a home that hadn't really prioritized any kind of faith. And so, like all teenagers, I rebelled against the prevailing mood of the home, and I decided that I was going to be a Christian. And I bought a little silver crucifix, a bit like this one. And it was something that bemused my parents and actively seemed to annoy my grandmother, who discouraged me from it. Despite that, I tried to read the Bible, dug into it a bit, thought, wow, this is a bit long, and then got a bit distracted and kind of just got busy with being a teenager until I got to university, which is when things started to get really weird. I started to encounter all sorts of strange God-shaped coincidences. They were specifically Christian. Jesus' name would come up. The first three girlfriends that I had were all Christians. I can't even, it could take another 5 minutes just to go into all the weird little things that happened to me. But it kind of came to a head one night when I was staying at my girlfriend's dad's house in Johannesburg. She had this big pad. Her dad was away, and we were just, doing what young adults do, running a bit wild in this pad. And I'd had this, thing, these weird coincidences happening, and we'd all just taken LSD. One of the first times I'd read Aldous Huxley, and I was really interested in, what LSD could do. So I'd taken this trip, and then I suddenly thought, wow, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable with everything that's been going on. I'm going to nip this in the bud now. So I kind of threw down a gauntlet to this invisible God, and I went, right, this is your last chance. I'm going to turn that piece of paper over there over. If it says anything about God, then I'll just accept defeat and become a Christian. And if it doesn't, that's the end of it. I'm probably projecting. This is crazy stuff. I want to just enjoy my life and my night. So I turned over this piece of paper, and of course it was a printout from my philosophy module on 7 theories of human nature, and it was theory 3, Christianity. So it was just so obviously hard to argue with that I went downstairs and said to my girlfriend, who was a sort of a lapsed Christian, I said, oh, I've got to become a Christian now. And to her credit, she said, good, fine, okay, we'll get you to church, we'll go to church. And then began a strange night of feeling slightly uncomfortable, which actually ended in me walking around in this white robe that I'd, for some reason, bought the day before at the Oriental Plaza. I had very long curly hair then, so I had this sort of frizzy halo, and this white robe and this leather-bound family-sized Bible about this big that I was walking around reading. I often wonder if there's any pictures of that out there. But then cut to the church. I went along to a church at Grahamstown University called His People, which was quite a charismatic church. The friend who had told us about it sort of said, just so you know what to expect, it's quite charismatic. I went in there and I sat at the back. I was really going a bit cold on the whole thing. And then they did the altar call. They said, oh, there's someone here who wants to receive Jesus. And I was sitting there thinking, well, of course there is. You've never seen me before. I'm not that into this. It's all a bit weird. I don't know what to do. I'm definitely not going to answer that call. But then I realized that there was a shooting sense of energy going through my whole body, and my left hand was up in the air, somehow against my will, but also just sort of, it was just happening. And so, I went along and they prayed for me, and I said that I accepted Jesus. And that was it. I was now a Christian, except that it didn't sit right with me still. I was a young man at university. I wanted to party, spend time with my new girlfriend. So I went to a few life groups, and the priest came to the house and talked to me, but I slowly began talking myself out of it a bit. I think often of, the story of Jonah and the whale now, because that was my going back into the belly of the whale where I lived for the next sort of 20 years. And it was always a case of, I was never fully away from God. I was always checking, especially in times of need or fear. And in some ways, when I look back, that lukewarm Christianity did actually shape me in a good way. It did build certain convictions and morals and values. But it wasn't quite there. And one of the things that I always said as a sort of bargain that I'd make with God was that if this happens or if this doesn't happen, I'll do an alpha course. I'd heard about Alpha, and it was one of the things that seemed to pop up everywhere. I saw signs everywhere I went. Even in South Africa, Alpha is quite big in the year 2000 and the few years before it. And so, yeah, I'd lived this life of sort of very much not even a lukewarm Christian, sort of an arm's reach Christian, if you like. Um, so I get to the ripe old age of 50 something, 51, and I've had all this stuff going on, and I'm now at a bit of a crisis point in my life. I've been struggling to stop drinking because I've got elevated liver markers, and whilst I'm not drinking in a way that is antisocial, I'm definitely being, bad to my body. And I've had 2 or 3 periods of stopping for a spell. I've always gone back to it and gone back to the bad levels of drinking, and I'm struggling with that. I've now stopped quite abruptly at a time when I've been quite stressed by things. My marriage is breaking down. The whole world is very complex. All sorts of weird things are occurring to me. And for whatever reason, I have this week of extreme stress that results basically in me being in a very dark place, so dark a place that I actually get on my knees and go, okay, God, I'm here. I want to do this properly this time. It's not just another promise. I'm going to do an Alpha course. And also, I decide to myself, because I've prayed this prayer so many times and it's been empty, I want to mark it. So I call a friend and I say, do you know anyone who's a Christian? I want to talk to a Christian. And they put me in touch with a lovely woman called Carol, who happens to be visiting from America for that day. And we have this call, and I sort of dedicate my life to God to her on the phone. She's a little bit bemused, but I feel like I've done what I want to do, make this more of a proper commitment. And from then on, everything just sort of got much, much better. One of the things I prayed for in that time was that my dad would recover from a bout of ill health, which he did. I also at that time was told that I had an irregular heart rhythm. I prayed about that, and that disappeared. And as I was leaning into it, I told myself, do you know what? Since you were a teenager, you were obsessed with peace and love. I used to idolize the '60s, and I realized that, you know, following, and that was, by the way, why I was interested in Aldous Huxley and LSD as well. I finally realized that everything that I'd always wanted and everything that I'd always been avoiding were actually the same thing. And the process of the last year and a half for me has been just realizing that more and more. And it's a journey. I'm still not sure that I'm all the way through that process. I hope I'm not, because I'm not perfect at all. But every day I think I'm better than I was. And I think that's pretty amazing.